most of you haven't heard about Joe. Joe, just to be honest with you, it's not about Joe. Joe is about the kingdom. I had the privilege of working with Joe. He took a church of about 140 to now there are about 4,000. He's been an overnight success in 32 years. But what is more impressive, and you can read about it in his book that's back there, and he'll tell you more about it, is that last year they gave $4 million to missions, and they have missions in every nation. I think there's something, Joe, is there something in the Bible about every nation?
Matthew 48, Jesus mentions that.
Yeah, he does mention that. So Joe kind of has this idea that if you say yes to Jesus, you'll be doing okay. So would you welcome Joe? Come on up and Joe and I have been friends. I used to speak a lot there for Faith Promise, which they are big into. And so we've known each other for a long time, served with him. And let me tell you the type of guy he is. We had a staff member that left the church, and then he wanted to start a church about 5 miles from there. Robbie started the church. What is it right now? Runs 2,000. A guy that didn't leave under good circumstances, and he showed the grace, and now God is using Robbie in that church in an incredible way. That's the type of guy you're going to get to listen to today. So let me pray, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe. Father, we thank you for gathering us together today. I pray that what we hear will further the kingdom. And Father, I pray that what we hear will help that each person here understand that we have a call that's bigger than we can do, that we must depend upon you. And without you, we're nothing. So thank you so much for bringing us together. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Joe, take it away.
Thank you, Mike. Well, I'm honored to be here, a little terrified, but even after all these years of doing this, Mike failed to say the one thing that I'd like to be introduced with. I have 5 children by 4 different women on 3 different continents. Luann and I have 2 biological children, and then we adopted 2 from Ethiopia. We thought they were brother and sister. Turns out they were cousins, so 2 different mothers there. And then we adopted a 2-year-old from China, who's now a junior at UCF studying archaeology, much to her mother's chagrin. So, Kathy, you ever have a feeling like that? Like, why did this happen? Yeah, okay. So, listen, I have ADHD pretty bad, and I bounce all over the place. Some of my staff call me Captain Chaos. So you may experience some of that during this time here. But you can stop me anytime. You can ask me anything you want to ask me. We'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. We talk about leadership. We're going to talk about missions. We're going to talk about church planting, church growth. But it really starts with this statement right here. We developed a mission statement 32 years ago based on Acts 15:19. And it bothers me when it takes people years to come up with a mission statement for the church. Because it just ain't that hard. And most people, it's been 6 months and end up stealing somebody else's. But in Acts 15, there's a debate going on because Paul has won some Gentile people to Christ. And this has thrown the Jewish church into some confusion. And so there's a big meeting going on, and they're all arguing about, well, can Gentiles be saved? Can we even let these people in the church? What do we do? Are they Christians? What in the world do we do? Finally, at the end, James, Jesus' half-brother, he said, shouldn't we be making it easy for people to come to Jesus? So we flipped that line, and our vision statement is this, that we exist to make it hard to go to hell for our generation. Now, everything is filtered through that very lens. So a lot of stuff that happens in churches doesn't happen in Tomoka. Because if it doesn't have a purpose, we don't do it. But how did you get there? Well, I just let a lot of things die. A lot of things that used to happen, I just quit talking about them. I quit promoting them. And eventually they died, and the things that we're supposed to be doing slowly started to take over. And as Mike said, an overnight success at 32 years. And honestly, people have asked me, when did you feel like things were actually getting somewhere? 25. I was there 25 years before I felt like, you know what, I think people are starting to get it. And that's the honest truth. So one of the things I would say, and I don't know if it's where you're at right now, but you do need to find a place. If you're a pastor, a preacher, minister, whatever you call yourself, you need to find a place to say, I'm not leaving. I'm going to change this town. I'm going to change this city. I'm going to invest my life here. And I thought for me it was going to be Jacksonville. That's where I first met Mike. Mike and Kathy were serving in Florida State at the time. And incredible campus ministry they had down in Tallahassee. And I thought I would be there forever. The hardest thing I did was leave there, but that church was messed up. And after 5 years of being there, in fact, it's been 32 more years now, and they're just now turning the story around. It's taken them 37 years, but they're actually doing it. You know why? Because a missionary came home from Zambia, Africa, and said, I bought a house here. I'm not leaving. You're not firing me, and I'm going to stay, and I'm going to change this church. And he's doing it. It's actually happening. So from the vision statement is where everything else starts to flow. So about 30 years ago, our missions director, Pat Bolus, who's still going, weak, but still going. She's in her late 80s. She's no longer the head of our missions, but Pat went to a conference, a prayer conference out in Colorado Springs, and she came home and she said, Joe, they asked us to take a sister city somewhere in the world and start praying for that sister city, and then make that a base where you start planting churches. And I thought, oh, okay, there's lots of places in South America she could have picked. I said, well, what city did we take, Pat? She said, Mecca, Saudi Arabia. Okay, so we started praying. Okay. Mike, is this being broadcast somewhere?
On YouTube.
Okay, but it's all right. I will tell you that right now we have multiple churches that are operating in Mecca. Again, overnight success, 32 years. But it's amazing what God has done. If you really want to know, if you said, Joe, I'll give you three months to plant a church, another church in Mecca or a church in London, I would take Mecca. I would have a much better chance of planting a church there than I would in London. I'm working in London right now with some friends, and it's tough. But out of that vision statement and out of that commitment, we started to re-look at Scripture. And we looked at Matthew 28. You know the Great Commission, Matthew and Mark's account. And as we looked at it, we said, God's speaking to all of us there. He said, I want you to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. He didn't say, hey, Joe, you get Nicaragua. He said, I want you to go to all the nations. Now, I know the disciples, they spread out and they went all different places. But when we read that, we said, you know what? Doesn't that mean us? Aren't we responsible for every country? Look, we got to looking at it. It's not that complex, by the way. There's only 195 countries in the world. It's really not that big of a deal once we got started. And that's all in the book. We'll talk about that later. But I think maybe the bigger question is, okay, what do we do to get from where we are to where we want to be? And you're thinking, well, the church runs 4,000, so you're not thinking in my league. So right now we have two churches that we planted. One runs 120, one runs 130. We're getting ready to open a third campus as soon as we get a fire marshal to cooperate with us. We took another campus that was running 70, about 90 miles from us. This Easter they had 650. They're in 2 services. It's still a little short on the finances, but it's all because they decided that we are going to reach lost people. That we are not here for ourselves, we're here for everybody else. And for 32 years, our people have heard me make the same statement. We are the only organization, church, we are the only organization that exists for people who pigs. The people that aren't here. The problem is your church doesn't believe that. You may not even believe that. Because if I think, well, I'm the pastor, I get the good parking spot. No, you're the pastor, you get to park off-site. Oh, well, I've been here 30 years, and it's Easter Sunday. Yeah, that's right. And I told our people before, on Palm Sunday, I said, you're going to be tempted to come in here with that attitude. I said, don't do it. I said, you need to be the first one to go to overflow. You need to be the first one to give up your seat. You need to be the first one to come to one of these weird hour services so that the regular people can come. But you can either curse the people that come once or twice a year, or you can bless them and hope that you pick some of those people up. And that's been our model, really, all along. So I want to start off with Ezekiel here real quick, because I think this speaks to where a lot of us are. My first church was in Raymond, Illinois. I had a church of about 40. My first full-time church was in Middletown, Missouri. We had 50 at Easter, and we thought we were killing it. When I first went to the church I'm at now, we had 140, and that was the vote, whether I should come or not. We never had 140 after that. So it was a fairly split vote, but anyway. So I do understand the struggles. I understand the financial struggles, the building struggles. I will tell you now, I don't mean this to sound wrong, but we know that the main campus is going to do well because God's blessed us. People come, people give. But when I get reports off of that church, the campus is running 120, and they say, hey, we had 5 new visitors today, and we have 2 people ready to get baptized. It's kind of like watching your grandchildren. You're like, now we're getting somewhere. Because I expect it from us, but now I'm watching our grandchildren start to produce, and this is where it gets exciting. But I'll just read this to you. You know the story. But it says, the hand of the Lord was upon me, Ezekiel 37, and he brought me out with the Spirit of the Lord, and he set me in the middle of the valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, O sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then he said to me, prophesy, preach to these bones, and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will breathe, put breath into you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded. As I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, son of man, and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come from the winds, O breath, and breathe into the slain that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood on their feet, a vast army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. O my people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you will be my people. You will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live. And I will settle you in your own land. And then you will know that I am the Lord who has spoken. And I have done it, declares the Lord. Now, I do understand that he is talking about Israel. And I'll give you the background on that. But then I'm going to bring this home for us in churches. So you know about the destruction of Israel. You know about they were taken into captivity. So almost 2,800 years ago, Ezekiel writes this story. Ezekiel's in Babylon, and there's no hope for Israel. There's nothing left. And there's so many problems with what's going on here. Ezekiel's a priest, And priests are not allowed to be with dead bodies. And God takes him right out into the middle of it. Interesting. And the other problem is there's ways that you have to bury them. When Jewish people die, you bury them the next day. You would never leave them out like that. There's just a whole lot of things wrong with this story if you're Ezekiel and you're walking into this. But Ezekiel gives the answer that I think we would all give, a cop-out answer. Lord, you alone, no. In other words, I'm not going to make a commitment here. I'll just hide behind the sovereignty of God. God says, okay, Ezekiel, you're going to preach to those bones until something happens. Now, in the context of the story, there's a couple things that go on here. So, if you go to Israel, anybody ever been to Masada? Like that? You guys been to Israel? Gotta go. Not now. Today will be a good day. Masada is where the last Jewish people held out in 73 actually. So what is happening here is fulfilled as Israel becomes a nation again when they come home from Babylon under Ezra and Nehemiah. So their nation will come back together, but then in 70, Titus comes in and destroys everything and literally leaves nothing. And the last group of Jewish people are out on this mountaintop, this fortress that King Herod had built, and they were down to, I don't remember the number, 6, 7, and they believed that if you committed suicide, you couldn't be saved. So they drew lots, and one guy would kill all the rest of them. The guy that drew the last lot had to take his own life, which basically meant you're condemning yourself to hell. I believe God's bigger than that, but that's what they believe. But what's interesting, in the synagogue, you think about God and his graciousness to us. In the synagogue, on top of Masada, they found one scrap of a scroll. 2,000 years old, a piece of scroll from Ezekiel chapter 37. Guess what they were praying? They were praying, Lord, can these bones live? Lord, is there any coming back from this? Is there any way that we survive this? And they were claiming this passage. Now, go to Isaiah 66:8. The question is asked by Isaiah, can a nation be born in a day? Interesting passage. Because that's only happened one time in all of history. I'm proud to say there was a Missouri guy, we finally got a Missouri guy in the White House, and it changed everything. Harry Truman was sitting with a pen in his hand in 1948. He had the Jewish delegation there. He had all the politicians telling him why this was a bad idea. And the Jewish people saying, Harry, you're going to make history. I don't even know if they knew scripture. But they're like, Harry, you're going to make history if you sign this document because Israel is going to exist again. And when Harry signed that document in 1948, acknowledging Israel as a nation, the nation was born in one day. And you're welcome to look that up, the prophecy and the answer. So there's the big Jewish part of it. Okay, now let's play with this passage. Can these bones live? What do we got to do? What do we have to do to get your church on fire? What do we have to do to get your church from 30 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 200, 200 to 400? We've got to have some vision. We've got to have some fire. Mike and I were talking on the ride over yesterday. One of the lines I use if I'm sitting one-on-one with any preacher, I say, what would happen if you got 10 people to get saved in your church this year? They said, it would change everything. It would change the energy in the room. It would, that some of the plates would be a little broken up because there'd be new people there mixing it in, and they would have new friends who would invite new friends. The money would come up a little bit. I'd say then, okay, your only job as the preacher is to go get those 10 people. All right, we know you can preach. Go get those 10 people. Spend your life at the gym, at the school, at the coffee shop, whatever you got to do to go get those 10 people. Dennis Bratton, who, you guys know Dennis. Dennis was preacher in Jacksonville forever, had a monster church there. And Dennis made a statement, I don't know, 35 years ago that it's right here. Dennis said, any preacher worth his salt ought to be able to find 2 people a week to come to church. That's what you do. And he said that to me, and I certainly wasn't doing it. He said, but anybody worth their salt ought to be able to get 2 people to come to church. And he said, if you get 2 people to come to church, he said, I'll give you 2 weeks off for vacation. He said, if you do that for 50 weeks, that's 100 people, and you do that for 20 years, you've grown a church. And I thought, that's interesting. Because everybody thinks you just fall into stuff. Like one day, 4,000 people showed up. It's still every single day. I mean, if you go to the coffee shops in our city, you will find our staff, or the wing place. It's amazing how many of them hang out at Hooligans. Our whole staff's there eating wings. You will find our staff sitting there with new people that are asking questions, people who want to know how to be saved. And honestly, sometimes I amaze myself with what an incredible evangelist I am. I was out at dinner the other night, and Mike, you know I'm kidding, right? Okay. We're out at dinner, and Sandy Munch, her husband Dennis was a great leader in the church. Dennis died during COVID. And Sandy's getting ready to get remarried. And she brought her boyfriend to this dinner. And he told Sandy, whatever you do, please don't leave my side. Well, this is a 65-year-old man. Well, everybody piles into our part of the restaurant, and all the women go to one end of the table. All the men go to the other end. And poor Mark is sitting right across the table from the preacher. And you could see the terror in his eyes. And I looked at him and I said, Mark, tell me your story. And he went on for the next 30 minutes to tell me about, he was a paratrooper in the Army, told me all about his life, about his first wife walking out on him, and all that he'd been through. And I just sat and listened. And I decided he was a colonel, so they had a connection. And after about 30 minutes, we're talking back and forth, and I said, well, Mark, I said, where are you with Jesus? He goes, not where I need to be. He said, I need to be baptized. He said, I've accepted Christ. He said, but I know that I've got to, I didn't say a word. I'm just sitting there eating. He calls Sandy over. He said, Sandy, we've got to set up a time for me to get baptized. And I'm like, man, I'm just slaying this. All I did was ask the guy about himself. He led himself to Christ. When we baptized him next Monday, his daughter said, we're going to take pictures, and his daughter said, I want it videotaped, because if it's not videotaped, I won't. I don't know what his past is. All I know is the guy's been changed by the power of the gospel. Now, you and I know that there are thousands and thousands of people that don't know Jesus. And some of them even claim to be a part of the church, but that doesn't mean they know Jesus. You'd be amazed. I used to feel bad about people that would transfer into our church. But I found out half of them didn't know Jesus. They might have been a member of another church for 30 years, maybe denominational church, maybe one of our churches, but that still didn't mean they knew the Lord. And we just treat everybody the same. We just share the gospel with them and give them a chance to accept Christ. And we baptized one of our staff members a couple of weeks ago. She's like, I just realized I've never done this myself. Okay? A lot of it is just giving people the opportunity. But you have to understand, and no offense to the professors, but I'll offend you, but you just don't have time to spend 30 or 40 hours a week on a sermon. God bless the professors, and that's wonderful. But you got to figure out how to get more efficient. You got to get better at it. I'm not suggesting that you steal everything, but you got to be able to get better and faster at putting together what you're going to say. And really, the truth is, nobody's going to publish your stuff in a book. Nobody is going to put. I'm not Charles Spurgeon. I keep I pick up the Daytona News Journal every week, and they have yet to put one of my sermons. After 32 years, I am never on the front cover the way Charles Spurgeon was. And I finally realized that that what I really need to do is quit writing sermons and start communicating the gospel. And so most weekends I don't use notes. I know what I'm going to say. I have an outline. Mike said I should tell you this. My sermons are written 2 years in advance. The outlines. And the reason I do that is those outlines will go back and forth in front of my desk a dozen times before I ever write a sermon. And so by the time I've written this, getting ready to write the sermon, I've already had scripture come into my head. I have drawers full of stories and jokes, and I'll find something, I'll be like, oh, I'll be using that in October. I've got a capital campaign coming up in September, so I've been pulling all the great stewardship stuff that I can find as that's coming in now. If you're living week to week, you're putting yourself in a deep hole. And you have to, at some point, you have to trust God. If you miss a sentence, it's okay. And I say this to our worship team, and our worship leaders are, one of them has a master's degree in piano, the other one's a master's degree in viola, and they are intense. Somebody sang an A sharp. We can't have that. And I'm the guy coming in saying, I'd rather you miss a note and do it with a smile and stay on stage and love somebody after the service than to hit every note right and then people think you don't care about it. There's a balance. You can do both. But preachers, nobody's looking at us going, man, this guy's the next Charles Spurgeon. They're just not thinking that. You're trying to give them food to survive. And I don't even care. I mean, if this place is totally together, great, but let's see. This last week, I've had 4 people die. Got another lady dying this morning. I got a phone call. We got 3 or 4 major people in major marriages in the church in huge trouble. Our prayer ministry leader, her mother walked out in front of a train Saturday morning at 2 in the morning. This is just a normal week. And people are not impressed when I say, well, you know, what you really need here is the Greek verb. Look, it's okay. We need to know the Greek verb, and I know you're the genius back there, Stephen. It's okay. I'll call Stephen and get that information. But you're working in a people business. That's why I hang out at the coffee shop, because that's where people are. Or Walmart, or the lady that I prayed with walking through the Atlanta airport because her granddaughter was killed in a car wreck. And she was so broken, she confesses all of this to the stewardess, what do you call it? Flight attendant, thank you. The flight attendant on the plane. And the flight attendant, bless her heart, she's like, well, I'll keep you in my thoughts. And I'm like, okay, she's trying. But I got her out in the terminal, and I just said, you want me to pray with you? And she said, oh, would you? I mean, it's not a big deal, but it's about being real. It's just about being with people and caring about people. God took Ezekiel out in the middle of the field to see if he cared. Now, I'm going to tell you this from Ezekiel. You can check me out in Jeremiah chapter 1, and you can check me out in Isaiah 6. And this was an astonishing thing to me when I came to this conclusion. I was preaching through Isaiah a couple years ago. By the way, I always preach through books. I understand it's not cool. Four reasons to do this and 3 reasons to be happy in marriage. I've done the book of Acts. Last year I did the book of Genesis. 3 years ago I did the book of Isaiah. And right now I'm doing 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And so just last Sunday I preached chapter 9. Paul says, I become all things to all men, so by all possible means I might save some. There's my goal. That's the only reason I preach, is for somebody to be saved. And if you've got any other agenda, yes, I'm trying to teach people, but if somebody doesn't get saved, I'm not happy. That's what I'm praying for, somebody to come to know Christ. And that's got to be where we get you guys, that you're not happy unless somebody finds Jesus. Great, we've got 30 people that love Jesus, 50 people that love Jesus, 200 people that love Jesus. But what about the people that right now, they hate Jesus? How do we figure out how to get them in here? How do we figure out how to get them saved? But in every one of these calls, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Isaiah, there's a piece that I bet you missed, because I'm not very smart, but I missed it for 40 years. When Isaiah gets this call from God, you and I have this idea that it's like this. And that God is standing there and he says, hey, who will go for me? And who will represent me? And Isaiah looks around. Oh, take a look again. Isaiah's the only guy in the room. Jeremiah's the only guy in the room. Ezekiel's the only guy in the bones. And God looks Isaiah right in the eye, 101, and God says, Isaiah, who's going to go for me? Isaiah says, well, I'm going to look here. Here am I, send me. See, when you realize God has gifted you and called you to do something, you just go do it. I mean, it's easy. Ezekiel was told, Ezekiel's got the worst call ever. Ezekiel, you're going to spend your whole life preaching and nobody's ever going to listen to you. In fact, all of the Jewish people are going to be like scorpions to you. It's a beautiful calling. It's a beautiful calling. Nobody will ever listen to you. But you are going to be my man. So he stands there and he preaches to these dry bones and he begins to watch God work as he's speaking. They come together and then we see the skin. But there's one problem. To quote Tommy Oakes, if you guys know who Tommy Oakes is, they're still dead. And until the army's got breath in them, they're no good. So God breathes life into this army and they become a life-breathing, life-giving nation once again. A lot of our churches need that breath of God. They need that energy, that passion of God, that purpose. Why are we here? Are we just here to open the doors for another weekend? Or are we here to get somebody to Jesus Christ? Now, one of my mantras is this. The only thing that God cannot bless, you want to write this down? Nothing. If you do nothing, God can't help you. You got to do something. What do you mean? I don't know. Start a food pantry. Get into the local school and say, what do I do here? How can I help you guys? What can our church do to connect? Go down to the coffee shop and just sit there and get to know people. One of the places I hang out, I'm a baseball card collector. Is what I call myself an art collector. It makes me feel better. But that's my barber shop. And that's where I go to get away. And it's a little rough. Well, it's more than a little rough. It's cutthroat business, and there's some rough characters that hang out there. But every one of those guys, and their women, but mostly guys, have all become personal friends. And they say, Joe, you know you're going to do my funeral, right? I'm like, you're not ready to die yet. You're still going to go to heaven. I look for little opportunities to. But I didn't go there with that in mind. I went there because that's something I like to do. And because of that, I woke up this morning, I got a text from a friend of mine and said, hey, here's a Cardinal, because that's really the only team. I don't know if you guys are all Cardinal fans, as you should be. No. Like, you know I'm wearing my Cardinal hat tomorrow night.
Yeah, I figured.
Okay, all right. We're going to the Braves game tomorrow night, so there's a bunch of information. All right, and I'll tell you another scripture that I think is fulfilled in this. You're welcome to check me out. I understand he's saying that Israel will come back to life when they come back out of Babylon, but I can't help but see another prophecy when he talks about the graves will open. I went and hunted down that verse. It's in Matthew 27, 50 to 54. To me, it's one of the most haunting verses in all of the New Testament. It says that the second that Jesus died on the cross, the graves of the righteous broke open and walked the streets. Now, let me help you here, all right? Because I say this many, many times. Anytime there's a miracle story, if you're trying to pull off a hoax, if Jesus is a hoax, the Bible's a hoax, the disciples are a hoax, you're going to have graves opening and people walking around the streets. How are you going to verify that unless you have verification there because people saw the dead walking the streets? Could that be part of what Ezekiel was saying? Because Ezekiel said, I'll open the graves. You'll find out that I'm going to restore Israel. I'm going to put this all back together. And again, it's about Israel. It's about the church. It's about us. We can make it go anywhere you want. We want to make the application. The story is about Israel, but the question is, can what we have now actually live? And another pastor used to say this, out in Colorado, and he'd say, people would say, oh, there's 4 churches in that city. He said, that's the wrong question. He said, are there any life-giving churches in that city? And what he meant by that is exactly what I'm talking about. Is the gospel being preached and are people being saved? Are ministries being done? Are missions being supported? Or is it just church? Is it just a small group of people that meet and have church and go home? Because that's fine. And in fact, I would call that a small group. That's what I would call that. A small groups where you get together, talk about the Bible, eat some food, and go home. Funeral, small group, whatever you want to call it. But the result is the same. And if you don't grow your church, it's not going to exist. And guys, the number's staggering. You can check, somebody check, but the last number I saw is that over 7,000 churches are closing in America every week. And for everyone that closes, for every 7 that close, we plant 2, and only one of those makes it. So we're losing 6 churches a week somewhere. Now, some of them need to die, I understand that. But not only are we losing those churches, the population's going through the roof. Our Florida's growing by 10,000 people a week. What do you do with that? You know, the same thing, you know, one of Mike's missions, his passion was to Paul. And you stand over these cities and you look at these monster cities and you think, Lord, what in the world are we going to do? I stood over Bangkok, Thailand, back in January, and I'm like, Lord, you're kidding me. I don't know if you might have ever been to Thailand, but the Old Testament never came to life to me like it did in Thailand. They worship the high places. The altars are up on top. The statues are everywhere. You go on tours and they're like, that's the demon that I worship. And you're like, what? And everything you think, like Angkor Wat, which is in Cambodia, but the word means temple gathering, same thing. They had a bunch of those in Thailand, and you will never feel more evil in your life than when you're inside one of those, because they're all dedicated to demons. And there's demon statues all over the place, people sacrificing to trees, people praying to a plaster of Paris Buddha that's 80 feet tall, and you're like, this can't be real. And that's why they need Jesus. Now here, instead of the big Buddha, they have a Buick, but it's the same idea. They're still worshiping something other than Jesus. And listen, if we're not excited about what we're doing, if we're not excited about our church, if we're not excited about our preaching, how do we expect anybody else to get excited? Right? And guys, I know it's hard to preach without notes. It took me a long time. But I will tell you this. When I step out in front, and this is what's on stage, I have one of these. I don't use a chair. I have one of these, and I have my Bible laying right here, and I stand right up in front. Nothing in front of me, so I can openly communicate. And I just tell them a story. And you call it a sermon. But by the time I get ready to preach, it should be my story, right? I wrote it one way or the other. I stole some of it from Mike and stole some of it from this guy on the internet. But I cobbled it all together. And so when I get up there, it's my story. Nobody's going to know if I miss a sentence. I do 4 services on the weekend, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. So I used to be bothered by that. Oh man, I forgot that. Then you know what I thought? God knows what he's doing. Maybe somebody needed that service, and they didn't need that service. I have to trust the Holy Spirit. Maybe I'm just stupid. That's okay too. That's all right. But some of you, all right, can I say the work thing, Mike? All right. So I started off, they asked me to come speak to a group of church planners in Florida. And some of them have churches, some of them are new, some of them are getting ready to start. And my opening sentence was this: if you're not willing to work 70 hours a week, you're in the wrong job. Room got real quiet. Because what about my family time, and my personal time, and my vacation time, and my video game time? Okay, everybody in your church is working 50 hours a week to survive right now. Maybe more given the current economic situation. Then they got their kids' activities, sports, grandkids, whatever. Then they come to church, and you expect them to give a couple hours there, and you expect them to serve, and maybe come back to something that's going on. And you want to work 30 hours a week? Guys, the worst thing in the world, I beg you, just don't be a lazy pastor. Put in your hours. Again, I don't care if you're sitting at the coffee shop talking to people. You're working. That's okay. I have no problem. I drink a lot of coffee. Spend a lot of money sitting in coffee shops. Just say, hey, let me get that for you. Sit down and let's talk. And you'd be amazed what can happen in those types of settings. All right, question before we go on. Okay, so here's the deal on my book. There's a bunch of them back there. It's called We Said Yes, and that's what I'm going to get into in the next section here. They're $20. I don't make anything on them. All the money goes to Christian Arabic Services, which I'll be happy to talk to you about why you're not supporting church planting in Egypt. But all the money goes to them. I get nothing from this, and I give away as many as I sell. So if you don't have $20, just take it. If you've got 20, you want 3, take them. It doesn't matter to me, okay? That's between me and God are working on this. So you do what you want with it. The books are there.
And I've read it, and it is incredible. And I will give you this: what you read in there is true. So Dan's going to say he told me 1 minute. Okay. Can they just steal your books too, Dan, or are you selling yours?
Hey, brother, stay in your lane. I did not go to missions. That goes to my retirement. So. And I preach without notes, but also without an outline. So, yeah, it goes a little different than your guy. Am I doing my announcement? Christian City?
45 seconds.
No, so my announcement is
40 seconds.
My announcement is we're having Dr. Billy Strawler will be with us for our Metro Atlanta Ministers meeting, which doesn't mean we have to be in Metro, you can be from wherever, but we'll be at Peachtree Christian downtown. It's central to everybody, to drive. But he's going to do dealing with, here's the title of his thing, how to work with elders in a control-obsessed culture. So that probably doesn't hit any of y'all, but you can come for a free lunch. We go from 11 to 1. We stop on time. We get you out of there. So come, it's free. Okay, that's all.
And Dan's here representing Christian City. And so he's got his book back there, and you can learn about Christian City. And if you don't know Dan and you haven't had him speak, get it too. So
Hey, Dan, I'll bring an outline.
You didn't say when.
I'm sorry, May 7th is Billy Strawler. May 7th at Peachtree Christian.
All right.
And I only have 8 books left.
How much?
They just went up to $100.
How much are yours? 18.
Wow. I want to say this about Joe, and then I'm going to let them do this. I served with Joe for 3 years, and then I moved to Ormond Beach Christian Church in Milledgeville, Georgia. A church of about 150. And what I learned there helped us to grow to about 1,400. And I credit Joe with a lot of things. Joe will not remember this, but we were sitting on the front row one Wednesday night, and we were doing a communion service, and people were walking by. And he said, Mike, I don't know most of these people. And boy, that gave me a lot of permission once we started growing, because sometimes you get caught in your mind that you've got to know everybody. And and once a church begins to grow, you can. And so, but that's just a little bit of what I learned from him. And so listen to him as he shares with you today. I'm going to turn it over to David Powers. CFR is helping pay for this today. And so they get to do a little commercial. And Tomoka Christian Church in Ormond Beach is huge investors and has benefited from
Investor and followers.
And
I'll let him talk, and then Joe will take over.
Yeah, just quickly, thank you, Mike. And I have no book to sell today, so I didn't know to come prepared for that. We at CFR, we love sponsoring these events with the point. I love being a part of that, hoping these things come to fruition for you guys. If you're not familiar with CFR, we've been around for 44 years. We partner with local churches, help fund projects. So it may be a refinance of your project, your building that you have. It could be buying land or helping with expansion, renovations, those sort of things. We love to do that. A great place for you to invest dollars if you've got surplus and just have savings that you want to set aside. Those dollars can help fund local churches across the country. So whether it's you as an individual or a family, your churches can do that. And some really cool things that our CEO has just made some changes. Darren Key's made some changes to our giving fund here in the last month. That really has a very low threshold now for entry in that, so you can do all of your charitable giving through that. We're seeing a lot of churches that are using giving funds for their missions giving as well. So dollars that sit there grow at 5% and can take a lot of those administrative loads off of you as well. So if you've got questions about that, we're here in the back. We'd love to give you some information, talk about CFR. But quickly, Joe, just tell folks, I know you guys have had a long relationship with CFR. You're one of our great partners in Florida. Good, bad, none, but you can talk about it. Tell us about CFR and Tomoka.
I'll start about the investment side first, because Darren has helped me a great deal. If I live to be about 97, I'm going to be able to retire. But I do have my retirement with CFR, most of it, like I have a lot, but what I have is there. A lot of our people are there. I think Tomoka's got $24 million invested with CFR, so obviously we have a huge trust. They pay well. And the other side is when you borrow money, I have to pay well on the backside, but it's far better than any other institution you're going to have. Let me ask you this. So you're struggling with finances, and everybody, well, in your big church, you don't have any problems. None of you here are going to go to bed tonight $10 million in debt, but I will. Okay? So problems are nothing but zeros. If you're running 50 and you're $50 short on your budget, it's just zeros. That's all it is. But none of you are $10 million in debt tonight, so you can feel really good about yourself when you go to bed. But we would never, and one of the things I prayed about a long time, and our elders, was, is it going to be worth building this building? Are enough people going to get saved to justify? Because I think the Lord's close. And I'm like, I don't want to build this building if we're not going to truly get our money out of it. And it's been 9 years now. We've averaged over 200 baptisms a year for 9 years. Thank you, Carrie Graham. I know some of your friends. Carrie's our evangelism pastor, and she is money. If you're not saved, you don't want Carrie after you. Carrie, you are going to accept Christ one way or the other. But because the banks were lined up, and then when things crashed 10, 12 years ago, everybody pulled out overnight. CFR stepped up and loaned us $10 million. Actually loaned Salty, the church we planted, $1.5 million on a warehouse. They were 9 months old, and a bank wouldn't have touched that. That's the church that's now running 2,500 because we were able to put them into the building. So, see, we're again both sides. We're borrowing and we're investing. So.
Yeah, thank you. And I would love to say thank you, because I know many of you that are sitting in this room are investors and have dollars sitting in CFR, and we couldn't do what we do without you. We couldn't help churches like Tomoka. We couldn't help churches like Salty. So thank you for that continued investment. If you're not invested with CFR, we'd love for you to be. Any questions on that? love answering. Thank you, Joe.
And our church has our savings accounts there too.
Yeah, exactly.
Take it over, Joe.
Okay. All right, I don't even know how to go about this, and I wrote the book, but I'm just going to tell you the story real quick. I won't read it this time. You need to read it. Ezekiel 47 is the story of where, once again, God takes Ezekiel on a journey. And this time, Ezekiel is in the temple. It's a vision, but he's in the temple in Jerusalem. And God takes him out in water that's up to his ankles. Now, I don't pretend to understand why he keeps measuring. I don't know. But it says he took him out and he was up to his ankles. Ezekiel's like, okay. And then it says he measured off again, and it's about a football field. I didn't check that out. About a football field, and God took him up to his knees. And he goes, that was okay. And he said, then he measured that off again, and he took me deeper into the water, and this time it was up to my waist. And the Lord measured it off again and took me out, and this time it was up to my head, and it was a river that no man could cross. What's the story about? The story is until you and I get to the spot where it's too big for us, too much for us, we'll never see God work. It is too easy for pastors, elders to stay ankle deep. To stay ankle deep in the Word of God, ankle deep in prayer, ankle deep in evangelism, ankle deep in ministry. And that's where this book came from. We said yes. Because Pastor Gord Bear, who's been my executive now for 14 years, we went to college together, so we've been friends for 42 years. He said, Joe, I finally figured this place out. This is like 10 years into being there. He said, every other church's default answer is no. Or, if you're pious, your answer is, I'll pray about it. And again, when I'm in the pulpit, one of the benefits of being there 32 years is I don't care what you think. Well, I didn't anyway, but now I've got enough confidence. And so I will say things like, hey, we're sponsoring children today in Haiti. And Haiti is absolutely devastated. It is totally wiped out by gangs, drugs, alcohol. It is beyond any nightmare you could ever imagine. And we've got 25 kids that this mission is brought in. We've been friends with this mission for 10 years. And we need sponsors. It's $25 a month, $30 a month, $35, whatever it is. He said, well, I've got to pray. That doesn't sound pious when you say that. So I cut you off on stage and I say, you prayed about it. So you're telling me you went home and you prayed, and God said, you know, let them starve. I said, I don't think so. So let's be honest with each other. Either go out there and take a kid and say yes, or just leave. But don't give me this phoniness about, now I will tell you, the guy at 1122, what was his name?
Joey Martin.
Yeah, Joey. Yeah, Joey did one, and so I tell Joey's story when we do big child sponsorship weekends. I said, now, I would never do this to you guys, but I want to tell you Joey's story. I said, Joey, when they came in the door, he had Compassion International there that week, and he had everybody take one of the flyers, and people would say, no, I don't want one. And he said, no, you got to take it. Cool. Joey's going to talk about it. So Joey does his whole message on compassion and caring about broken kids and the impact that we have on kids so that we can raise up the next generation. And then he said to the crowd, he said, and for all of you who do not want to support the kid you're holding, just throw the folder in the trash because that's where the kid's going. And I said, no, I would never say that, but Joey did. Guys, that's how I feel about missions in general. Do you not understand this is what we were called to do? And in the book, I talk about, even if you do missions, probably 80% of what you do is not missions. We have a food pantry. You should have a food pantry. The church should pay for that. We support pregnancy crisis centers. We do too. You should. The church should pay for that. What is missions? Well, what's it say? What does Matthew 28 say? What's Mark 16 say? What's Acts 1:8 say? Go into the world, make disciples. All right? And we measure everything by that. Now, I will tell you, we treat people differently. You're starting a church in Tokyo, we do not have the same expectation as somebody who's starting a church in Costa Rica. Because we understand, culturally, there are huge differences. Again, much more fruit right now in Mecca and in Cairo than we're having in London. In fact, our biggest problem in London is no white people go to church. We're there building a multi-ethnic network, but the multi-ethnic that we're missing is white people. All the churches that are there, they're British citizens. The churches are Eritrean, Ethiopian, Nigerian. There's not an Englishman there. There's no English people going to church at all. Well, white English people. There's lots of Indian English people. More Indians own homes in London right now than anybody from Great Britain. The whole world is upside down. And we've got to look for ways that we get the gospel out there. We plant churches. And everything Tomoka does is about, again, I can filter you very quickly. Joe, I would like to have a whale exposition. Well, our vision statement is that we exist to make it hard to go to hell from our generation. How will the whale display help us accomplish that? And if you don't have an answer, which you won't, then we don't do it. Well, after 30 years of this, people got a pretty good handle on it. And they will come to me now and say, hey, we want to do this, and this is how we're going to leverage it for the kingdom. This is how we're going to reach lost people. This is how we're going to get unreached kids to come to this group. This is what we're going to support as a mission while we're doing this event. And everything we do is missional. And I will tell you, even my own elders sometimes, I had one come in my office the other day, I have 6 elders, by the way, who I have nothing but the greatest respect for. And I even make them nervous all the time. Because what Mike's talking about, faith promise, you guys are probably familiar with that. We have faith promise every weekend. Every weekend. There will be a missionary come out on stage with me. I will say, this is my friend Mike. We've been friends for 25 years, and he's planning a church in Belarus, and we're committing $15,000 to be a part of this church plant. And I hope you guys help me because I don't have any money. And I do it week after week after week for the last 30 years. And you're like, there's no money. Oh, there's more money now than there's ever been. It's amazing how much money is available. And every week, there's different people. Some people bring their 20 because they know Joe's going to do something. So they'll bring their 20 and they're going to throw their 20 in no matter what it is. But we're planting churches in Ireland. Well, my grandma's from Ireland. By golly, I'm going to get behind that. Well, we're planting a church in the Dominican. My kids are from the Dominican. There's all kinds of pockets out there. Now, can you start where we start? Doubtful. Doubtful that you're going to start with $4 billion a year. But when we started, we were $1,200 a year, $12,000 a year, $12,000 a year. But we never made that. When I came, that was the budget was $120,000, and they would give 10% commissions. But I found out this was my first viral events could have happened in the first 2 months. I said, why didn't our missionaries get paid? And the treasurer said, well, we didn't have enough money. And I said, the missionaries get paid first. This guy was a big-time finance guy, and again, why I didn't get fired, I don't know. But he said, well, what do you mean, Joe? There's only so much money. I said, exactly. And I said, if they come to church next Sunday and there's no air conditioning, I'll bet you they give more. I said, but we're going to pay the missionaries first, because that's how a tithe works. So our church tithes the missions, and then we give the missions, and then we have this sort of faith promise that happens every week where we get somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 toward a special project every week. And you're like, well, and how do you split still? Joe, 195 countries is a lot of places. you'll find out in the book that almost everybody we work with are indigenous people. People like, aren't you afraid that guy in Kenya is going to rip you off? Let me tell you something. After 40 years in the ministry, everybody's ripped me off in America. I have never been cheated by national. Now they might, sometimes their idea of money is a little different than mine, and I give them $500 for a project and they may spend part of it on something else. I'm not there. Your kids are starving to death. If you need food money, then you do what you got to do. But the indigenous go, oh, how do you know these people, Joe? We go. Every one of these places we've been. I was trying to figure it out the other day. There's one guy on our staff that he was 55 when he started doing mission trips. He's 77 now, and he has led 80 mission trips. Not going, he's led 80. Most everybody on my staff goes every year. There's about 80 people on staff. I'll just tell you how we do staff too. So we try to pay them competitively, and not always what they should be paid, but they get their vacation. If they want to work in camp, that's not vacation. That is paid. They go to work in camp. And if they do a mission trip, they have to raise the money for the mission trip, but they will be paid their salary while they're on the mission trip because they're still doing their job. They're just doing it in another country or on an Indian reservation or whatever. And then the last thing we do is the last week of the year, we pay our employees to not work because we kill them during the stretch of Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so they know that if you get, whatever, you get 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever you've earned, but then you know you've got another week built in at the end of the year that you will get paid for. And all I can tell you is the more that you give, the more God puts in your hands. And the tighter you hold on to it, the less you'll have. And it's not uncommon because we spend way too much money in missions. But when we get a phone call saying, hey, here's what's playing out right now, we got to have $10,000. We step in. We got to 10, we'll send it. We may send 5, we might send 2. But we're already vetting with all these. These are our friends. These are my friends that don't have food in Haiti. These are my friends that are refugees in Myanmar, in Thailand. They're not just people out there. These are all my friends. And so when they send me an email and say, Joe, we're in big trouble here, what can you do? We're going to find a way to say yes. And for you that are numbers people, God bless you. You can thank God if you don't work with me. But with missions, typically by October, we're $200,000 in the hole. We've already spent it, given it away. And the mission team will get together and pray. And I'll just give you an example. This last year, it was $280,000. We were short in October, but for the whole year. We prayed, and by January 15th, we were $200,000 to the good. Now, can I do that? No. Do I know people with money? I do. But that's not always who gives it. God just sends money. Because God blesses what He cares about. Now, no offense, but you're having a social tea for the ladies to get together and eat chicken? Why would God bless that? Nobody ever asked you that question before? There's nothing wrong with it, but why would God bless that? Do a food drive for the kids in the school system. Right now, we've got, I think, 18 schools that we are their food. There's supposed to be a county program that takes care of this. Anybody's the biggest fan of government as I am, they do nothing. And so all these schools, we started with one school, and they said, can you guys help us with food? We got 25 kids that don't eat during the weekend. We took care of that. And then another school heard about it and said, well, can you help? One of the schools that we help, let's see if I may be able to work up here. Here's the Christian church in that town. Here's the Baptist church in that town. There's the elementary school. Guess who provides the food for it? We do. Our people come to church with armloads, cases of ravioli, SpaghettiOs. And then we have people that go in and are able to share the gospel with the school, with the administrators, with those kids. They pretty much give us open doors to do anything we want to do, despite all the insanity that's going on in our schools, because they know who's meeting their needs. And we do the same thing with church plants. We do the same thing with missions around the world. My personal passion, I've got my shirt on here, and in fact, I've got brochures, I shouldn't put them in the bag. I'll put them here. My personal passion is, and I got involved with this because of Becca, because when we started this in 1994, it was illegal for a pastor to even go to Mecca. Today, I could actually fly into Saudi Arabia and I could take a tour of Mecca. It's very, very different. In fact, I don't know if we're paying attention, but Saudi Arabia actually backed Israel and the United States with this recent attack from the Iranians. Now, a lot of that's because the Saudis hate the Iranians, but that's okay. But Saudi Arabia is becoming a much softer nation. They're becoming a little bit more like Egypt. But for the first time in 1,400 years, since the Muslims invaded Egypt, it is legal for us to plant a church in Egypt. It's legal. So we're buying up land, we're planting churches. We have over 1,000 churches in the Arab world. We have over 550 in Egypt. We have a 7-campus seminary up and down the Nile Valley that has over 500 students in it at any given time, preparing for the next 500 churches that we're going to be planting. We're in Sudan, South Sudan, Lebanon, Syria, even in Arabic parts of America. We're in Michigan, we're in Detroit, we're in Los Angeles. We've got churches everywhere, and all of those churches are self-supporting. It usually takes about 3 years for those churches to become self-supporting, for the pastor to find some kind of a tent-making type of a deal. So we have over 1,000 churches, and our budget is about $400,000. And so part of what I do as the chairman is I get to represent Christian Arabic Services and talk about the ministry there. So anybody that wants to help plant a church in Egypt, for $250 a month, you can plant a church in Egypt. And I'll hook you up with a church planner. We'll work through translators. And if you want to go with me, we send 5 teams a year. We haven't got to our mission trips yet. We do, I don't know, somewhere between 50 and 75 mission trips every year. That depends on how you count them, because a lot of them don't get counted, because there's a few of us on staff that are just rogues, and we just like go. I just realized the other day I didn't even talk to our missions person. We did a trip into the Dominican, and it was kind of a side deal that we were working on a new church plan. And we built a new children's wing in a church in the northern part of the Dominican, because prostitution is off the chain. We've had a huge push to fight sex trafficking, and so we decided in this one town our best move was to build a children's center. It cost us, I think, $12,000. I don't know what you get for $12,000 here in this town, but where I'm from, you wouldn't get drawings made for $12,000. And we have a children's center. It just opened this last week, and they sent me pictures of like 5 different age groups at different times that are now in this children's center. Because we got to reach these kids early, because once they hit the streets, and if you've not been to Dominican or Haiti or other parts of the web, plenty here in America, but sex trafficking is just off the chain. It's right in front of you on the streets. It's sitting beside you in the restaurants. And you can, again, we can pretend, or we can be real. And you won't have to listen. You listen to my sermons. People ask me why I do this every week, but every week I will let you know that we are pro-life, that we are pro-marriage, man and a woman. We're not into transgenderism, homosexuality, that we are pro-life, that we are fighting sex trafficking. You say, well, how in the world do you have time for that? All I need is one story. Just give me one sentence. Hey, so-and-so just said this on the news about marriage. Well, let me just say something. And in one or two sentences, I can cover everything I just said to you. Because I don't want anybody to ever have to come back and say, I wonder what their stance is on pro-life. Oh, you'll know. Wonder what their stance is on the book of Genesis. You'll know. And it's really not that hard, because it's just a couple of sentences, and it's in there. And some of my friends, I had a friend quit coming to church, and it's heartbreaking. And I said, why? And said, because you won't get off this homosexual kick. And I said, well, when it stopped being in my face on the news, I'll stop talking about it. But when it's every single day, that's the lead story, whether it's a soccer player on a girls' soccer team, or it's, you know, somebody on The View. I quote Rhoda, what's her name? Lady on The View. Whoopi Goldberg. I quote her a lot. I quote Whoopi a lot. Whoopi said last week, I used this last week in my sermon. Whoopi said, listen, this stuff about abortion having to do with God, she said, I want you all to know straight up that abortion has nothing to do with the Ten Commandments. Well, I just quoted Whoopi. I didn't need to say anything. I just quoted Whoopi. And then I said, now I'm going to help you guys if you don't know, thou shalt not take innocent life. Okay, that was my statement. That was a pro-life statement. And that was in the middle of 1 Corinthians 9, talking about I become all things to all men, so that by some possible means I might save some. But I am not backing off of anything. And I know what you're thinking, I'm going to lose people. Well, there's an old adage, if you guys are old enough to remember John Maxwell. I stole this from John Maxwell 30 years ago, and I've lived by it. You get to choose who you lose. And he said, if you don't preach on tithing, eventually your tithers will leave, because they're sick of carrying the load. And if you don't preach on pro-life, eventually the people that are pro-life are going to get fed up with your lack of commitment, and they're going to go somewhere else. Well, guess who Tomoka gets? Every single week for the last 32 years, we get all of the tithers, workers, and servers from every disgruntled church in our community. It's about 55 churches. We'll have meetings and they'll say, get ready, the Methodists are coming. Get ready, the Presbyterians are coming. Get ready, the Calvinists are coming. And we'll, in a staff meeting, we will discuss, here's why they're coming. Here's what's happening in the church, or here's what's happening in the denomination, and we need to be ready to minister to these people. When my Calvinist friends, when they come, they'll listen to a whole presentation. One guy will raise his hand. I say, what's your question? He goes, are you a Calvinist? I say, no. He goes, that's all we wanted to know. We're all members. Well, we knew going in what church they were coming from. Mike knows the church. And we knew exactly what their issues were. When they're leaving the Methodist church right now, you know exactly. I understand we've got a group of Methodists here. God bless you guys for standing on the Word of God. We know why they're coming. They're coming because they're sick of the mealy-mouthed stuff. So you might lose a few people if you preach boldly. And you might lose a few people if you stand for biblical truth, but you're going to eventually gain. Eventually, you will come way, way ahead in the process. And here's the good thing. I can sleep well at night. Because Galatians 1:10 ought to frighten you to death. If you're a pastor, if you're an elder, when Paul said, if I'm trying to please men, I cannot please God. And if I want to be a servant of God, I can't chase after men. Now, I'm not trying to run anybody off. That's not my goal. But I am never going to back down. Part of that's being somewhere 32 years, but some of that is saying, you know what? This is what God's Word says. And one of the benefits, guys, of preaching through a book, you can't hide. 6 ways to be happy in your family. Now, you can do whatever you want with that. Never offend anybody. But what a mess. Take a look at 1 Corinthians. I'm up to chapter 9, and there is no topic we haven't dealt with. Homosexuality, transgenderism, sex with idols, sex with animals. In the first 8 chapters of 1 Corinthians, you're going to deal with every sin that's going on in America today. And I told them that up front. I said, it's going to be a blistering 30 weeks. Because Paul is trying to set a church that is pagan, a culture that's pagan, and he's trying to help them understand what it means to be a Christian. Well, I can't do that if I don't stand up. And 2 weeks ago, 1 Corinthians 8, I didn't want to preach 1 Corinthians 8. Not a thrilling passage. I will never eat meat again if it causes my brother to stumble. Guess what I preached on? Anybody? Alcohol. I went into the whole story, explained all about the meat, explained the sacrifice to idols, and how that would be a part of worship. I said, but I don't know, I do have a Hindu in the church that chapter's been very useful. I have walked him through that verse by verse to help him deal with his own family. Who would sacrifice meat to idols and then give it to him on purpose? I've dealt with that. But day to day, that's not a chapter I can just really pull out of my pocket. But you know, what we need here is 1 Corinthians 8. But what Paul talks about there is being a stumbling block. And I said, guys, a lot of you wonder why I'm so anti-alcohol. So here you go. I said, so Joe is in hooligans. And does Joe have the freedom to have a beer? He does. He does. But if Joe has a beer and somebody else sees Joe having a beer, do I just tell them it's okay to go ahead and have 50? Absolutely, I did. And now, I'm not ready to give up shrimp. I was very honest with the church. I said, Paul's commitment here is astounding. In fact, when he says later, when Paul said, I wish that I could be accursed, I guess in Romans, Paul said, I wish that I would be accursed so my brothers and sisters and my Jewish friends could all find Christ. I am not ready to say, God send me to hell so that the rest of America can find Jesus. I'm not there. God sent me to hell so Whoopi Goldberg can go to heaven. I am not there yet. And I said, I'm not telling you that I'm going to stop eating shrimp and ribs if it bothers you. I said, but there are certain things, and we talked about sexuality, we talked about alcohol problems, drugs. I mean, you probably don't have any of those problems here in Georgia, but it's just socially so accepted in Florida. And you can make such a statement simply by not drinking. And I've used this story before. I sat with a guy in the church, and his marriage was a mess. And his marriage didn't make it. And he said, Joe, tell me what to do. I will do anything to fix this. I didn't even think. I looked at him, I said, quit drinking. He sat back, just stared at him. About 6 months later, I ran into him in a ball game. He said, hey, Joe. He was pretty much toasted. And he said, Joe, can I buy you a beer? Really? You see, he thought, if Joe will drink a beer, it'll justify mine. I said, no, but I'll take a Diet Coke. And this is the great part of the story. He wouldn't buy me a Diet Coke. Beer was $10. Diet Coke was only $3. So when I tell that story, people will come up to me now, be down at the Daytona to a minor league game. People say, hey, Joe, I just wanted to buy you a Diet Coke because that other guy wouldn't. And that's pretty cool. But now it's like $8 for the Diet Coke, so that's a real win. But when it comes to all this, it's all about the vision statement. We exist to make it hard to go to hell. So I don't want to be a stumbling block. I do want to reach people. I do want to spend time with people. I want to plant churches. So around the world, we work with nationals. So I was in Thailand in January, and I'm standing there with a guy, and he goes, Joe, we need to build this church. He said, there are all these people here, they'll come. They'll come to hear about Jesus, and we'll just put up this building. I said, how much is it going to cost? He said, $20,000. I said, really? He said, well, yeah, there's architect fees, there's, we got to sink pylons, and again, I'm thinking that's about what we're going to pay the fire marshal and bribes to get into our property. I'm just kidding. If I thought that would get me there, I would, but I looked at the guy in the eye and I said, yes, I'll find you $20,000. Now, again, I didn't start there. I started with 200. But You got to start somewhere. And what I have found over 40 years of doing this is that God has not run out of money yet. If I invested in the stuff He wants me to invest it in. And what is Jesus interested in? Only making souls. Go into the world, make disciples, baptize them, and then teach them so they'll go reach more people and baptize them and plant more churches. And I'm not against American missionaries. We do support some. But they're the worst investment. The only time I support an American is if it's a whole new area and there's no possible way to get it done any other way. Because bottom line, an American's going to cost me $120,000. They don't know the language, they don't know the culture, and they're going to come home and cost me another $20,000 on furlough. The guy that's on the ground costs me $30 a month. He already knows the language, he already knows the culture, he knows what neighborhoods need Christ, where churches need to be planted, he knows who owns the ground that we're trying to buy. And so it's amazing what we get done by working with nationals. Now what that means again is you got to get out of your church, you got to get on an airplane, or you got to get in a car. And we're on Indian reservations, we're planting locally, we're planting in Florida, we've planted in every state in the United States. You just got to get started. IH was at our church, not IH is coming next week. Good News Productions, everybody know them? You should. Good News Productions is working in 106 countries right now. And they got a program right now asking you to pray 15 minutes a day for lost people, to invite 15 people to your church, and to give $15 a month to reach unreached people. And you invest that $15, you just invested in 106 different countries because you're a partner with them now. See, that's how this works. You don't have to go and say, well, I got to plant a church in Nicaragua. We didn't do that. We went to Nicaragua, found people that were planting churches, and said, if we were to help you plant the next church, how much would it cost? Oh my goodness, Joe, it'd be a lot of money. Well, let me know, Joe, you don't want to get a lot of money. How much money are we talking about? Well, it might be $200 a month. It would take 3. And they just stare at me. And I'm like, guys, this isn't that hard. Now, the problem is, in London, it's not so cheap. That's part of the problem in London, besides the fact that it's London. But it is amazing what will happen if you and I don't have a default of no, and our default is yes, and we'll figure it out. Now, there is a chapter about when to say no. There's a whole chapter, and we say no to people all the time because they don't have our vision in mind. They're not trying to reach lost people. They may have a great mission, but it's not about reaching lost people, and that's all we're into. That's all we care about. Is somebody getting saved? Is the next generation getting trained? Do we have a leader for the next church? We started in Costa Rica 6 years ago, 1 church. We now have 9, and maybe we've invested $35,000 or $40,000, maybe. They just keep replicating themselves. We have a group it's an Indian tribe, lives up on top of a mountain. 500 people have come to Christ on top of a mountain in Costa Rica. And the pastor, all we did was buy him a motorcycle. He had a 1973 Yamaha that was held together with a baling wire. And he goes, it just is not fixable anymore. I would testify it was not fixable. We came home, raised $5,000 to buy him a used bike. That guy now travels those hills and ministers to his church. Those 500 people that are all up there on the mountain. And once a month we send in beans and rice and things to help them out because it's a very, very poor area. But that's just a little bit of what we do. A lot of it's covered in the book. And like I said, I'm not hustling for money. You just take the book. You will not hurt my feelings. I promise. But if you write me and say I want more, they're $20. I'm going to give you so many. If you want to make your own Xerox copies, that's between you and God. But questions? I don't know how much. Mike, how am I doing? Yes, sir.
Little church. How do you transition the idea of spending money to take people on a mission trip compared to spending it at home or to pay the bills? I mean, that's a big. How did you guys?
Well, we start with, again, what is our mission statement? And I don't pay for people to go on these mission trips. They raise their own money. We do have a cafe. We have a restaurant that runs on Saturday night, Sunday morning, Wednesday night, and it's completely run by our mission teams. They do the cooking, they do the selling, and they make all the profit. And that's some, they make some money there, but a lot of it, people are paying themselves. I'm going to Poland later this year, and my daughter's going with me, and I had to write a check for $1,200 just to cover her expenses. But we, through the vision, convinced people this is what we did. And people will spend their own money. They will raise their own money. They'll ask their friends to help them. Now, I wouldn't use church money for those trips. No, that's separate money. But you can do both. You can walk and chew gum. It can be done. And I think that's the biggest, well, we couldn't do 18 schools. No, you can do one. Let's do something. Again, I'll go back to my statement. The only thing God can't bless is nothing. And if you want to stay ankle deep, you can have a great kumbaya relationship with God. But God and I had a moment, 34 years ago, and I said, God, if this is what ministry is, then I'm out. I was a cocky, untalented guy. But God, I got into this because I wanted to make a difference, and I wasn't making a difference. I preached at the church for a year. We never filled up with baptistry. And I said, this will never happen again. And I said, and I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue what I was going to do or how I was going to do it. I remember one of the elders sat down with me and said, just exactly what do you think you're going to do when you go to be a senior pastor? I said, I don't know. But I said, we're going to find out. One of my statements was, I do want to create a church that my children want to come to. That was one of my goals. So, to put it in modern terms, and I'm sure you're very familiar, but it's very much a rock concert at our church. Sort of 2,000 rock. It's not 60s, and it's not really, it's really not 2020, but it's very progressive. Lots of lights, lots of smoke, whatever it takes. I become all things to all people, so that by some means I might save some. And so that's what drives everything that we do.
How much of your 80 staff members? How much of the administrative load for all of this mission work does your staff handle? And how much, you may not give the answer, or are you funding other organizations that are handling the administrative side of things? Okay.
Christian Arabic Services actually operates off my desk, and my assistant is Christian Arabic Services assistant. Our treasurer is Christian Arabic Services treasurer, and they all put in a lot of extra time because they believe in the mission. I've even offered to give them some kind of a stipend, and they won't give them because they know it would take away from what's going on in Egypt, and they're as committed to this project as I am. But no, a lot of it is fun.
Joe,
Yes, ma'am.
I'll speak as a former business manager for Joe Tomoka. Mike and I started there in 2006. So I was the business manager for the church, and Joe scared me to death. He did. I thought, and he would take up those offerings on Wednesday nights and on Sundays for the missionaries coming in, and I'm like, oh my goodness, we've got mortgage payment coming up, we have all this coming up. But I saw it. God was faithful. God was faithful. We had capital campaign while we were there. And, you know, you might have always been tithers and more, but we gave so much of that capital campaign, the IRS audited us for our giving.
Thank you very much.
So,
That's why we're only $5 million in debt instead of 10 right now. So thank you, Kathy.
But it's scary, when you put it on paper, it's so scary, but God is,
Yes. Yeah, and I know there's no doubt I scared, and Brenda's the same way today. And finance people are they're different. And I'm nuts. And when you put somebody that looks at numbers with somebody that's nuts, it's a tough deal because I'm like, well, we're only 20,000 off. That's close enough. Just round it up. And Brenda's like, no, Joe. She sits in her office for 5 hours looking for that nickel. I'm like, just put the nickel in the bucket and let's move on. But again, I understand we're all gifted. We're all gifted differently. And anyway, thank you, Kathy. Thank you for giving. We need more if you've still got habit.
I want to ask Joe this question because I know it was important to him. When you were a young preacher, you had a mentor. Talk about that.
Which one? Bob?
Yeah, Bob.
Okay. So I've had so many guys help me through the years, and Ben Merrill was one. If you guys know that name, Ben was a huge church out in California, and then he moved to St. Louis, and one of my elders had gotten Ben to come to a revival at our church. And I said to Ben, I said, would you come if I'd asked you? He goes, no. But there was a relationship with our elders, so he came. There's probably 135 people there. And, they could then you're wasting your time. And every night he would say, Joe, at 8 o'clock, meet me at McDonald's. And I'm like, oh man, I have done it now. I didn't know what I did because I really didn't do anything but introduce him. But went to McDonald's, he bought me an ice cream cone, and he said, let's talk about ministry. Let's talk about how you're going to grow this thing. And every night of that revival, nothing happened with that revival. Zero, nothing. Except Ben Merrill poured into me every night. And then Bob Moorhead, who had a church out in Seattle of about 6,000, Bob retired to Daytona Beach. And I am terrified that Bob Moorhead, one of my heroes, is just kind of like Dan. I told Dan earlier, when I was a youth minister, I was stealing all of his stuff. But Bob Moorhead had this church of 6,000. Bob was writing all the books. He wrote dozens of books, doing mission work like you wouldn't believe. I said, Bob, you scare me. Bob said, Joe, I am your biggest fan. And he would come into my office, and he would stay an hour. And he'd say, Joe, today we're going to talk about preaching. What you're doing is really dumb, and we're going to change that. And the next time he'd come, he'd say, Joe, today we're going to talk about stewardship. You don't know what you're doing, and this is what you need to do. And we'd get done, he'd pray for me, and he would go home. And probably one of the defining moments in our ministry, we were at Bob and Lenita's house. Bob's with Jesus now. Lenita's close. She went back to Seattle. But we go in and my wife disappears. 20, 25 people in this house, and she's gone. And so, what preachers do, shaking hands, eating ribs, whatever we're doing. And finally she shows back up and she said, Lenita took me into her bedroom. And she spent 30 minutes sitting down with my wife saying, Luann, your job is to love your husband and raise your kids and to help the church. You do not have to carry the load that Joe carries. And it changed Luann's life when she realized she could be a part of the church and she didn't have to be at everything that I was doing. It set her free. And then before we left that night, you'd have to know Bob. Bob just doesn't care. Bob would grab 2 chairs, put them in the middle of the room and say, Joe and Luann, sit down. And we were there for a social event. And he would have everybody gather around us and pray for us. And we're just sitting there, just tears running down our face. And if you're one of the older guys and you've got a chance to encourage men to pray for a pastor's wife, there's no greater feeling in the world. Again, it's like watching your kids and grandkids reproduce now.
So some of you younger guys, there's some older guys here, some of our professors. I would really encourage you to find a mentor. It makes a difference.
Absolutely. And everybody, what is the old one? I don't remember what was honest, that encourages you, and Timothy that you pour out to. Yeah. And I mean, every Monday morning, one of the guys on our staff, he was a Baptist preacher for years, and through a series of how he didn't get paid, he's 77 years old. He's the guy that's led 80 mission trips. And so he's still having to work at 77 just to exist. And, every Monday morning, he's sitting in my office when I get there because I stumble in, and he gets up at 4. And Cliff sits down and says, Joe, how you doing? How's your marriage? How are your kids? What do you pray for today? And the first hour, and I dread it almost every Monday. I'm like, I'm going to call Cliff. I'm sick. I don't want to come in and face this. But every Monday morning I go in and I sit down and we pray together, we cry together, we laugh together. It's invaluable.
To give you an idea about missions also, when the hurricane hit the Bahamas, our church wanted to do something. I didn't know who to go through, so we just sent 10,000 to Joe because I knew he was going to know exactly what to do. And they had people there on the ground in a heartbeat. So
Again, we were working with all Bahamians, so we went right to the source.
so that's
You guys sent you a thank you note to them?
I don't know. It didn't matter. Any other questions?
Anything you want to know, whatever. I'm an open book, so.
Okay, Joel?
So would you encourage every person in the missions that
Absolutely. To me, and this is what I, again went through with my leadership. When you tithe off your own income, that's first. You don't tithe at the end. When you get your paycheck, the tithe should be written first. And same thing with the church. And to this day, I'll show you this crazy spreadsheet that I get every weekend. But so we took in 135,000, and the missions got 8,000, and then this got whatever. But I know that $13,500 of that 135,000 will get transferred to our mission, but that'll be the first thing that happens. And since we put God first, which we've done really since almost 30 years, it took a year or two to get this implemented, we've never had a money problem. Am I $5 million in debt right now? I am, and by the end of the year it's going to be 10. But God always provides because He comes first. And I mean, this may be a lesson for all of you, because if you're not tithing, that's where it's got to start. If the pastor doesn't tithe, there's no chance you're going to preach on it or talk about it. And if the elders aren't tithing, there's no chance you're going to talk about it. So it's got to start with leaders and leaders.
Joel, you have a question?
Yeah, Joe, it's easy and common for churches to focus on the rights, privileges, and preferences of the people they have. And that's a hard shift to make, to focus on people who are going to help because they don't have Jesus.
I talk about it every week. I said, because what you just described is a country club, not a church. Country club says, where do I get to park? I get to use the special seats. I get special access. Church says, I'll park off-site. I'll come to the strange service. I'll give. I'll be the last one out. It's a mind shift. It is a total mind shift to understand what the role of the church really is, that we exist for people who hate us. It's insane, but Jesus taught that, so did Paul. Did I answer your question? Yeah, you just have to talk about it. No, I remember people saying, we would build a gym back at the old property that we've now sold. And people said, well, this will be great, we can play basketball. I said, well, only if the community hasn't gotten signed up first. And they said, what do you mean, this is our gym? I said, that's exactly why the community gets to use it first. That's a mind shift.
Any other? We have time for one more question. One more question?
CNN. Oh, I'm sorry, I was supposed to read what was on the card. New York Post, yes.
How many Sundays per year do you preach?
I preach about 40 right now, yeah. And it's kind of been that way for the last 3 or 4 years because it was really killing me. It did, well, it almost killed me. I have leukemia, and it almost took me out. And we've hired some great people around me. And so now the plan is that once a month I'm off. And probably look to, if everything goes the way Joe thinks it's going to go, I'm 9 years from retiring. And if that's the case, then the closer I get to that, the less I'll be preaching. To eventually where I'll be the guy preaching the 12 instead of the 40. But right now I'm still carrying 40.
And some of you may have missed this at the beginning. He's written 2 years out outlines. I was always amazed by that, but that gives him a lot of freedom. And the best part about it is I was counting every Sunday on I was going to get a good sermon. And there was a lot of me and a bad joke. He always has a bad joke, too.
Like there was a guy, people always trying to sneak through security and stuff in Atlanta, and there was a guy disguised as a suitcase. He got carried away. That's what you get, that's what you get.
So, we'll close on that. We'll close with a bad joke. Joe will be around so you can ask questions. Lunch is served out there, and the whole idea of this is that you can hang out in here and talk with one another, network. Again, I want our professors and staff to stand up. Go ahead, Nathan, you can stand up. And Josh, Wyatt, Gordon, and these are some folks that are resources and can help you. I do church relations and would love to talk to you. But hey, we're here for you, for the church. That's why we're here. And in whatever way we can help. Nathan is new on staff. You may not know about him. He came from a large church in Chicago and has a wealth of knowledge. If you guys don't know Zach back here, he is a storyteller. I mean, incredible. And so I just encourage you. Josh just has a book out, and so he's here. Gordon actually preaches and is a professor. Wyatt is doing all sorts of things, and I can't go into all that. But you guys take time to get to know them, along with the guys in the back, Dan Garrett and David Powers. Let me pray, and then we can go eat. Father, thank you for our rich time today. Father, help us to hear what you've said to us, and then help us to obey. Father, we thank you. The provision just of lunch today reminds us of your giving God, and help us never to forget that you will always forgive. That you will always forgive and that you always give to us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.